Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremunda for YogaUOnline, and I'm so pleased to be here today with Julie Gudmestad. Originally trained as an Iyengar teacher, Julie is widely known and respected for her lifelong body of work, which is focused on integrating the healing benefits of yoga with her training as a physical therapist. So she's got a yoga background and a medical background, and she's put them together over 40 plus years and has developed her own unique anatomy-based yoga training, and in a teaching style that combines the principles of anatomy with an understanding of yoga philosophy and the factors that hinder or even hamper healthy movement. Julie has also trained hundreds of teachers, and she's a leading force in creating classes and teacher trainings for creating yoga practices that are truly accessible for everybody, and regardless of age, stage, or physical condition. She's the founder of Gudmestad Yoga in Portland, Oregon, and she also teaches workshops throughout the US, Canada, and Europe, and has published many articles in Yoga Journal and Yoga International, among other publications. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Lynn.
You've developed your own style of teaching, and you're taking into account the yogic principles and technique. But another aspect of what you do, I know, is that you have developed a way of reflecting our Western way of living, that you've adapted your practices to the way that modern life has affected us.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Because I'm a physical therapist and have worked for many years with people with a variety of injuries and musculoskeletal problems, I feel that all of us physical therapists have a good understanding of what are the underlying issues that cause people to become injured and to have achy, naggy, recurrent musculoskeletal problems. And so there's muscle imbalances, for example, there's habitual positional issues that contribute to Americans, Westerners, physical vulnerability. And I feel that to take somebody who's really misaligned or has a lot of muscle imbalances straight into a really vigorous, active yoga practice, people will just move with their same movement abnormalities, their same issues, their same alignment problems. They'll just repeat those over and over and over again in the yoga poses, and then yoga becomes yet another avenue by which they injure themselves. And so our whole program over these many years that it's taken to develop it is to teach people in kind of bite-sized pieces that help to correct the misalignments, the muscle imbalances, the bad movement patterns, so that we just start with fairly simple things, and then those gradually build up to more challenging and even more challenging yoga poses. Hopefully in a way that people don't injure themselves or re-injure old problem areas.
I feel like kind of, as we're talking, there's a chicken egg situation that we have to have our jobs that we have. There's no, I mean, this is.
We have to have what?
Our jobs.
Our jobs, yes.
Most of them, they're not out plowing fields. They're,
yeah.
You know, some of us plow fields, but most of us sit at computers or have lifestyles that are necessarily a little bit more sedentary.
Yes.
And that kind of changes the body.
It does.
And the body being changed kind of changes the way we live in our bodies.
Yes.
And the changed way that we live in our bodies discourages us from changing the way our bodies are.
Yes. Yeah. All agreed.
So you have, I traditionally will think of physical therapy and I'll think of alignment and bones and things like that, but there's a lot of soft tissue. Does it actually get remodeled? Does it actually change?
Yes, it does. There's two avenues that soft tissue is affected by a truly sedentary lifestyle. So those two avenues are shortening of tissues when they're left in a shortened position. And the second avenue is loss of strength in important support muscle groups. So the shortening, when you look at a joint, if we take, for example, your elbow, and if you're sitting with your elbow constantly bent to 90 degrees, there are several layers of soft tissue, and that starts on the outside with skin. And then when you go under the skin, there are ligaments that join bone to bone, so the ligaments around the joint. There's tendon that joins muscle to bone. There's muscle, and there's other assorted kinds of connective tissue. All of that is soft tissue. And if you leave them in a shortened position over time and you don't stretch them out, they will, what I call, shrink to fit. And I think the clearest example of that is if you put somebody in a cast on their arm with their elbow at 90 degrees and you leave them for 6 to 8 weeks, which is the usual timing for somebody with a broken arm, and you take the cast off, the bone where the bone was broken, that has healed. But on the inside of the elbow, on the inside of the 90 degrees, all of the soft tissue has shortened. In 6 to 8 weeks, it was not ever lengthened out. That's the shrink to fit phenomenon. And that can happen at any joint in the body. So you might have a sedentary lifestyle in which you're sitting with your hips flexed to 90 degrees, which is classic chair sitting. And if you sit all day at work, you sit in the car, you sit at the table, you sit on the couch, and you sleep in the fetal position with your knees pulled up, then you're never lengthening the hip flexors across the front of the hip, and they will shrink to fit. You might have a sedentary lifestyle, but you also make an effort to get out for a walk, and you do some stretches, you do some lunges, some things to stretch the front of the hips. And it's not a death sentence for the soft tissue, but you have to know to take it out of that shortened position, hopefully at least once a day, so that it doesn't shrink to fit and get stuck in that short position. When it does, it's called a contracture. So that's a joint that won't move in its normal range of motion. It's stuck in the soft tissue, muscle, and other layers are stuck in a shortened position. And then that has all kinds of effects up and down the line on adjacent joints. I recently took a physical therapy continuing ed class on knee problems. And one of the points they made was that you need to look at people's upper back, head, and neck position, because if people have a forward head, which a lot of people do in our society, it affects the knee function when you're standing and walking. So it's wide-ranging effects, even if you're just looking at your head and neck alignment.
That's so interesting. And I think that you're making such a good point about the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
If you're talking about things shrink to fit, I'm thinking in my head, what's happening in the nervous system when that's going on? Because the nervous system guides our movement, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to even affect, like you're talking about getting up and stretching and stuff, but you're stretching an altered body.
I think, honestly, it's probably more of a problem as we get older, when our proprioceptive senses are starting to diminish a bit. And they're doing more studies on that now. And so you need to do more balance as the decades go by. Can I say that and be tactful? You need to do more balance challenging activities. But I'm just talking about physically lengthening out the soft tissue, all those various layers. They need longer holds. The stretches need longer holds to counteract the shortened position that things have been left in for hours and months sometimes.
The other thing that occurred to me while you were talking had to do with postural dysfunction and how many postural side effects there are that people don't recognize as being an effect of postural dysfunction. For example, breathing, that it hinders your breathing when you have.
Yeah. Well, I'm a physical therapist, and yoga person, so I tend to focus on musculoskeletal issues, but I feel very strongly that it's also affecting our nervous system. It's affecting, if for example, if you're sitting slumped over, so that you have a big kyphosis and you're short in the front, your chest is collapsed, typical slump sitting, that it's affecting the circulation of blood around your heart and your lungs. It certainly is going to affect the ability of your diaphragm to move normally. And it's going to affect your digestive organs and some of the other glands that are associated around the internal organs. So I think many problems are associated even above and beyond the musculoskeletal, which tends to be my focus. So one example of that is that people who are sitting and doing work where they're sitting and they have their arms forward and they have their head forward, the soft tissue on the front of the neck gets short. And so once it shortens, I had a teacher once, a physical therapy teacher, that called it, if you were spending a lot of time with your head forward and your chest dropped, it was like wearing a horse collar, a big horse collar around your neck, made out of your own soft tissue and your own connective tissue. And then once that shortens, you can talk till you're blue in the face, tell people to sit up, and they're fighting against their own internal shortness and resistance. Mm-hmm. Well, that is not only going to affect your neck, but also it pulls on attachments on the base of your skull, can cause headaches. It affects the position of your jaw and can cause jaw problems. So neck pain, headaches, jaw problems, it also affects your vision, whether you're bringing your head forward or back to be able to see. So I think we just have the tip of the tiger tail as we're starting to look at some of the postural effects above and beyond even the musculoskeletal, which is the pain and the movement limitations, which is what I spend my time working with.
The other thing that I think touches on what you were talking about when you're talking about slumping, and I found that it is impossible to engage your lower core. It's impossible to engage your spinal stabilizing muscles if you're slumped. It's impossible. So now you've spent most of your day with the muscles that really can support spinal health.
Yes.
And stability dislodged or turned off.
There's a handy phrase for that. It's called hanging on your ligaments. So in the case of the spine, so first I was talking about the shortening, the shrink to fit on certain tissues. And the other side of the coin is the loss of strength. When people are either hanging on their own ligaments, so when you're slumped over, you're just hanging on the ligaments on the back side of the body, including spinal ligaments. But you also might be supported by your elbows on the chair, on the table. You're supported if you really get slumped over, your rib cage is resting on your internal organs. Well, that whole time, your back muscles that are, the erector spinae is the best example, but there's others. The erector spinae is not doing anything. It's lazy. And so it's going to lose strength unless you get up from your chair, either at the end of the day or on your lunch break, and do some strengthening things, some opening the front and strengthening the back. I mean, it's a fairly simple equation. It's just that unfortunately, too many sedentary people don't know that they need to spend that little bit of time most days to counteract the effect of all the sitting.
I also find, I don't know if this is true globally, so I'll just share my experience and you can tell me if you've seen a lot of this, but When you say things to people like, well, you have to stretch to counteract that, they all go toward forward bending. They go
Yes.
toward encouraging like the stoop. And even in like a Paschimottanasana, in a seated forward bend, which I rarely teach, because most people just pull their shoulders down, and I'll say,
Yeah.
does anyone need to practice stooping? If
Yeah.
so, continue to do those forward bends.
Yeah.
But, what I think gets really lost in the shuffle, and I think I know why, is back bends. And why they get lost in the shuffle, you'll tell me if I'm wrong about this, is we don't like them.
Yeah.
Those of us who need them, we don't like them.
No, it hurts people's low back. It hurts their knees. They don't know what they're doing. Somebody says they should do them, but every time they try, it hurts. And so they figure, well, I must not be doing it right. And I'm very sad about that, actually, because in a sedentary society, backbending, now granted, beginning backbending actions is what people need the most to counteract the sedentary lifestyle.
Right. I just think that that word stretch gets associated with forward bending.
Yeah, well, that could be.
And there's an aversion, I think, also when you're a grown-up to going where you can't see what's behind you.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it? Tell us, Julie, oh master yoga teacher and physical therapist, why we should be doing more back bends. Because I do think when people come into my classes and they have an aversion to anything, there's a back bend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, what you're saying about the unknown, of moving backwards into the unknown, we could have an interesting psychological discussion about that. But I also think that people tend to gravitate towards what they're familiar with, which is the forward bending of slumping over. And I think that we as yoga teachers need to make simpler tools available to students. Simple, the underpinnings of backbending. Because if you go straight even to bridge pose, which is considered, you know, in my training is considered a beginning backbending action, let alone wheel. If you go straight into those, what do people complain about? Low back pain.
Low back pain.
Low back pain, low back pain. And so in my opinion, you need to start with much simpler actions. So we need to stretch the short and soft tissue on the front body, because when people are short in the chest, and that's the pectorals, everybody knows the big chest muscles, the pectorals, and the abdominals also get short when people are sitting slumped over. And so if you try to do a backbending action, then all of the backbending movement comes from the low back vertebrae, because the upper thoracic spine, the mid back, and even the upper part of the lumbar is stuck in a forward bend. And so the only thing that's available is L5S1, L4-5. Those are the more mobile sections in spinal extension. And you combine that with shortness of the hip flexors from all of the sitting, with the hips at 90 degrees of flexion. So the hip flexors are short, and that holds the pelvis in an anterior tilt. So from both ends, from the hip end and from the thoracic end, all of the movement is getting shifted down to that lower lumbar. And until you open the hips and you open the chest, and you strengthen the muscles, it happens to be the muscles on the backside, so the back muscles and the hip extensors, it's going to hurt people's back, and they're not going to want to do it. So we start with very, very simple movements that beginners, it actually feels good to them, because they can feel their chest opening, they have room to breathe. It takes the stress off of a lot of people who are slumpers. Their mid back aches. It's weak and it's overstretched, and you're hanging on it with your head forward, and their back aches. So our very gentle supportive back bends actually feel good to people. And we start that in level 1. with the beginners. Set the stage for the back bends that are going to come later.
Have you seen a kind of evolution in the way that the back body is approached? I would say it this way. When I learned, say, Warrior One, I have a lot of damage in my lumbar to sacral spine. And I can attribute a lot of it to learning Warrior One, where you keep your shoulders over your hips and then create a pivot right there. And sort of, you know, the rest of the back can go to sleep because you're just hanging on that L5S1 joint as you described it, like to just fake your way through back bends. I went through a lot of yoga classes that way. And I feel like the yoga community is recognizing that that is the wrong way to do back bends more.
Yeah.
But I don't know if is that your experience?
Well, I just have to say I don't know, because usually the teachers are listening to me and I'm not listening to their opinions about how they're teaching differently. But I'm glad if you're picking up an increased awareness of that, because there's a lot of issues. So a typical one that I've encountered is that when you actually, students are actually being taught back bends, all of a sudden they're also supposed to be able to control their hip rotation. And so heretofore, they weren't paying any attention to whether their legs were externally rotated or they were internally rotated. Now here I am in bridge pose. I'm supposed to keep my feet parallel and my knees parallel. And I have no idea how to control that. There's a muscle imbalance in the inner and outer hamstrings, and it's very hard to control. And here I am trying to lift up into the bridge and not let my feet turn out at the same time. And so there's very clear, milder, easier pieces to get people to start being aware of the rotation of the hips when they're going into extension. But all of a sudden, here I am trying to do Urdhva Dhanurasana. I'm trying to push up off the floor into wheel pose. My feet and my knees are turning out like crazy. And I have no idea what's going on down there, let alone how to control it. And so unfortunately, if you're in a pretty fast moving intermediate class, all of a sudden you're supposed to do all these fancy things and you're right back in the bad habits that you didn't even know about, trying to deal with muscle imbalances that are really hard to control at that level.
I think that also comes with trying to create an external shape, like a U shape in wheel.
Yeah.
Your shape may not be maybe more of an ovoid, or maybe you're not supposed to do wheel because it's not for your body.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. I think there's a much greater awareness these days of customizing practices to suit bodies rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's really important. But what I'm saying in addition is taking the months and sometimes years to correct the imbalances and train people's bodies so they know how to control these segments. It doesn't happen just from one lecture. It takes practice. It's like a top-level tennis player. It's automatic. The patterns that they use are just automatic. They're not thinking, oh, I need to rotate the racket in this way. They have practiced it thousands or millions of times in the right alignment before they can do it fast. And not that yoga poses necessarily are fast, but you have to get those segmental pieces in place and then be able to assemble it. And that takes time. If anything, one of the problems as yoga has come to this country, I think, is that people, and I deal with it with my students all the time, they see what I do after 50 years of doing yoga, and they want to go right straight to the hardest possible option. And I say, if you're newer to back bends or arm balances or whatever it is we're working on, try it this way first with the block. Nope, they look at me do, and they want to do the way I do it, even though they can't control what they're doing. So I've learned I don't even show them the hardest options at first. I just say, this is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
the time. It's having to put the time in. It's not the American way. We want to race to the finish line and get the job done. But that's the patience and the mindfulness, I think, that is an important part of learning yoga.
so in the back body dimension, you know, you think of having a backbone, having
Yeah.
that there is that quality of, you know, the straight ramrod straight spine is associated with inflexibility, but really having backbone and fortitude and all that is really associated with confidence and all of that.
It's, you know, it's an interesting, could be a lengthy discussion about body English, because if you see somebody that's really slumped over and they're stuck there because the pecs and the abs have gotten so short, you know, if you ask a group of people, like in the teacher training, I say, well, when you look at somebody who's really slumped over like this, what is the message you're getting about that person? So they say, well, they're depressed,
Mm-hmm.
or they're tired.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to be more upright expresses, like you said, confidence. It expresses energy. It expresses the strength to be able to go on and do what you want to do. And somebody that's really caved in looks depressed. They look low energy, sick,
Mm-hmm.
ill, tired. Yeah.
Where would you say like a strong back? Where does it start? Is it start at the sole of your feet? Does it start, you know what I mean? Does it start in your back, or is it the whole back body kind of? How do you approach that?
Well, I think, as you said earlier, it's somewhat of a chicken and egg phenomenon, and it can be the whole back body. But I actually start by physically strengthening the back muscles. And there's some very simple, easy things that pretty much everybody can do to physically strengthen your back. Unfortunately, when people think about, you know, they have their little routine that they do, or a little routine they do at the gym. So it includes push-ups and it includes ab work. You know, they do some crunches, and those are more front strengthening than they are, not exclusively, but more push-ups and plank pose really work the heck out of the abs if they're done well. So people don't know what to do to strengthen their back. Yeah. And there's some very simple yoga poses to do that pretty much everybody can do. And they need to be put into Westerners' routines to be done at least a couple or 3 times a week. And that's one of the concerns I have as the various styles of yoga kind of interface with Western society, is that there are some styles of yoga that their main focus is forward bending. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that forward bending is wrong or bad, because I practice them too and I teach them, but I think it needs to be in balance with the things that strengthen your back and work your back and bring you back to upright for our sedentary society.
We're also not doing a lot of things that we used to do, like haul things and,
Yep.
you know, things that lift heavy things. We have wheels, we have elevators, we have technology and automation.
Well, you know, I have mixed feelings about that, because people's backs are so weak and their legs are weak. And so if you say, okay, we don't have a cart for you to use, you're going to have to pick up this box of paper and carry it. Mm-hmm. They hurt their back doing it.
It's dangerous, yeah.
Because they don't use their legs and their backs are weak and they get rounded over, and it's a poster child for bad body mechanics. And I'm just telling you, as from 40 years as a physical therapist, that is the most common mechanism of back injury that I have encountered, is people lifting stuff in an awkward position that's too heavy for the strength that they don't have. Someday I'm going to write an article for Parade magazine about it.
Okay, so we've got our laundry list of why it's bad. how can yoga, you've already said there's a lot of yoga that can go a long way to mitigating some of the
Yeah,
comments.
and setting the stage to be able to do back bends eventually is part of the other part of the question, right?
But I guess the other part of the question is, doing back bends for the sake of doing back bends is not what you're talking about. Doing back bends to improve the quality of your life is kind of where, right?
I would say both. I think for people in a sedentary society, you need to do at least beginning backbending actions to improve your quality of life and your health, the health of your back, the health of your internal organs. But for somebody who's a serious yoga practitioner, back bends are part of the tradition. And you need to cycle through them. Unfortunately, a lot of people have one routine that is what they do. It's better than not doing any yoga, but they have one little simple routine focused more on forward bending kinds of things. So they do some ab work, they do some forward bending, but that needs to alternate with stuff that strengthens the other side. So a traditional yoga practice has forward bends, it has back bends, it has standing poses, it has balances, including inversions. And if you want a well-rounded, intermediate, strong yoga practice, you have to include all of those categories and be prepared to do them without hurting yourself.
And also I would add to what you just said, maybe what you mentioned a few minutes ago, that leg-back relationship, to a strong connection between the power muscles in the legs and the muscles in the back for both for yoga and for quality of life.
And I will say that, you know, most of my basic training was in Iyengar yoga, and Mr. Iyengar emphasized that people should start with standing poses. They should have a strong standing pose practice before they got very far into the other categories like back bends, like arm balances, which are so fun and so dramatic to look at. But the standing poses develop the strength in your legs and your hips and your back that is the foundation upon which you build those more intermediate poses. And I think, you know, I tell my students that they need to start doing a standing pose practice a couple times a week. And you know, they're beginners, so what do they know? They know Warrior Two, and they know Triangle, and they know Tree Pose. Well, you need to make a point of doing those a couple or 3 times a week, and to use a timer to build up the strength that you need.
So you are actually going to be teaching a class coming up very soon at YogaU on backbending.
A webinar, 2-part webinar, yes. Yep.
So talk about that. Who should take it, and will we learn some of those practices you've been talking
Yes,
about?
yes. Thank you for the entree. Yes, so I'm going to talk some about what are the problems with backbending? Why do people's back hurt? Why do their knees hurt? You know, there's definite mechanical, anatomical reasons that are fairly clear. So we're going to have pictures, both anatomical pictures and photos. I'm going to show the very simple pieces that people need to work on to build up to get themselves ready. And so there's a nice little variety and nice practice that you can do. And then I'm going to talk about what are the next pieces that you need to add to get to the actual back bending, like bridge pose and like wheel pose and bow pose. And we have some beautiful photos. But I feel that it's very empowering for people who want to progress to back bends, or who have tried and they've had problems, they've been scared off, their back hurts. So I want to empower people to know what they need to work on to be able to get there. That's my intent.
It sounds awesome. And you are not gearing this to teachers particularly, because we all have backs.
Yes. Well, it is definitely geared to practitioners.
Good.
And I think teachers I hear from teachers, they say, I try to teach the back bends and people don't do it. And if they know that it's going to be back bends next week, they won't come to that class. So I think it's important for teachers to hear. I feel like my approach is fairly clear and methodical. And so for teachers to hear how to get their students ready, and you need to start weeks or months in advance to use these building blocks to get them ready. So really, I think it applies both to teachers and to practitioners. And there's even some advanced practitioners that still have problems, with knee pain or with back pain or neck pain when they're doing poses. So this may give them a fresh look at what are some of the elements that they need to renew their awareness of.
I'm glad you mentioned back pain, because a lot of times when people have back pain, they think the go-to is always a forward bend, when in fact, the back pain may be a result of a imbalance or a weakness or the need to strengthen the back muscles. And forward bends are not necessarily going to do that for them.
Forward bends are not going to do it. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with forward bends. They're part of a well-balanced practice, but if anything, in our society, people tend to leave out the back bends just because they are hard. And I know that I have some intermediate students. I've got a couple of men that are, athletes. They're very muscular, they're very strong, but they're also tight. And they've been in the intermediate class. They try to get off the ground. They get their head about 6 inches off the ground, and in wheel pose, they can't get up there. So what do you need to work on? People who are motivated, they want to add. And in the case of the strong people, the muscular athletic builds, there's a lot of opening stretches that they need to make sure to build into their home practice. It's not going to happen overnight.
So Auntie Julie is going to bring in some back bending fairy dust.
Yes. Well,
and make the back bends accessible.
I have to say that I personally love back bends. I love back bends. And we did put one picture in there of me doing Urdhva so people will get to see. And I want other people to be able to love them too.
Awesome.
And I've had the moments with people who come to a class and we do a really thorough warm up and getting ready for it, and then they do a back bend for the first time, and they're so excited, and the energy in the room is wonderful. I want to make that accessible to people.
All right then. We will see you there.
Yes, I like the fairy dust. I like the fairy dust idea.
You're gonna have to do what is it called? Virtual fairy dust.
Virtual, yes.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so informative, and I am really looking forward to your course, and we'll see you then. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in class. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, everybody.